Whenever.
Hey everyone, this is People of Substance by LemonSkies. I'm your host, Olga Woltman, and my guest today is Max Seeland. Say hi, please.
Hey, welcome.
So Max is a director of major gifts at one of the higher ed institutions, and it seems to be a little bit of a pattern. Higher ed is a new topic for me, but one I'm very interested in. So I'm thrilled to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, excited to be here. And I've been doing fundraising for higher ed for nearly the past 15 years. It's been an exciting journey, not one that I was really expecting to get into, but I think that is a common theme for a lot of fundraisers. And it's been an incredibly rewarding journey as well.
So let's talk about how you got into fundraising. So your background, and I feel like 15 years ago, fundraising was not an area of study per se, or at least not a common one. So how did you land where you did?
I feel like it's a common joke when I talk to other fundraisers about, how did you get here? Because it's not exactly the thing where growing up you were like, well, I'm going to be a professional fundraiser in my career. There are now programs. I think the University of Indiana has a specific program dedicated to nonprofit fundraising. But like so many, I kind of fell into the situation. So after I graduated, I wasn't certain where I wanted to go with my degree and with my career. Graduated with a sociology degree, a psychology minor, and actually was engaged at the time. And my wife and I decided, well, we'll have very few opportunities before things get super serious in life to, go on a little journey together. We did a cross-country trip. And in advance of that, I wanted to put together some money. We were moving from one state to another. So reached out to some family and friends just saying, hey, I'm going to be moving, but I'm looking for, some part-time work. Do you have anything available that, would be temporary? Then we're going to take this trip. And one of my family members, my uncle, was running his own nonprofit that helped in the area of drug abuse resistance education. And in doing so, he said, oh, you mean like paying jobs? No, I don't have any of those, but our big fundraising gala is coming up. So it sounds like you have time available. You want to come by and help stuff some envelopes and do some outreach for us? And I was like, yeah, sure. I do, the family favor, that's fine. I do have time. So I ended up doing that with them, and kind of mid-trip, we were halfway across the country. They had just had their gala. The thing went very well. He came back and said, well, the board was talking and they think, things went swimmingly, but we want to continue to grow. They want to add another nonprofit events fundraising position. Do you want to interview? And so I said, yeah, sure. Would love to do that when I'm back. So did interview for that, got the role, ended up working for that nonprofit for about 3 years. And then, saw an opportunity at a university, a very small liberal arts college in southern Vermont, where one of my family members had graduated from. And so I was interested in going to Vermont, and one thing led to another. I became the associate director of development and alumni relations for Green Mountain College for a while.
Very cool. So you truly fell into it.
Yeah, absolutely. It went from volunteerism to, full-time role, and higher ed itself was just the next step. That was a really great opportunity to do something I hadn't had experience in, but really felt strongly about.
So let's talk about higher education for a second. And what I'm really struck with, certainly it's possible that somebody comes in and makes a contribution to an institution just because they like it. But a lot of people are alumni, which is very different from most charities, where relationship with the charity starts when they're getting to know them. It's much shorter. They don't spend 4 years literally immersed in the institution. So can you talk a little bit about just the whole notion of stewardship from a young whippersnapper graduate? How do you get them from that point, when charitable giving is probably not top of mind, how do you get them to that point where they become your donors and then eventually major donors?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it is, in my opinion, really a two-way street when it comes to young graduates of an institution. One, there's an incredible value back to the institution when it comes to current students seeing those recent grads on a more peer-to-peer level than, say, someone who had graduated 25 or 30 years previous. Most of the schools that I've worked for, when you have that amount of time that's elapsed, focuses change, programs change. But when it comes to the recent grad to current student interactions, like you said, it's a long span of time when you consider that 4 years is like 20% of a 20-year-old's lifespan.
Yeah.
So, that value of engaging them with programs that allow them to come back and tell some current students what their experience has been, 4 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, give them a better sense, especially when it comes to shared areas of study, areas of interest in their career. There's incredible value there. And I think it's also, I'm not certain higher ed just across the board does the best job, but the value of getting your degree from an institution shouldn't just end after that 4-year span. So as an alum, there are great opportunities at a lot of the schools I've worked for where, you come back, get some advice on putting together your resume, on, the types of job opportunities that might exist within a field that you're interested in, but maybe didn't know a ton about while you were a student. So the two-way street, I think, for engagement works really strongly in higher ed, where, you should be a proud lifelong member of that university, that college, but you can also come back and help in ways that have nothing to do with straight philanthropy, giving money. Even though, I'll say I've worked for annual fund offices throughout my career, in addition to major gifts, and even $5, $10 contributions. When you have thousands of folks that are able to contribute at that level, it makes a big difference.
Adds up. I keep thinking about when you spend those, it's not just 4 years of your life, but it's also very formative time for most of us. And, you're living and breathing it, and there's a lot of emotional connection that you form to the place. So how does that play into a sense of community and the sense of wanting to give back?
I think it plays in a big way because, like you said, it's a time of growth. It's not strictly connected to what you're learning in the classroom, but for most, it's the first time you're out on your own. You're not under the guidance and oversight of parents or guardians. So you learn a lot about, the peer group that you hold, making friends, making connections that might help you down the road. Extending yourself in directions that you might not have thought in the past was an area of your interest or focus. And you do that, essentially on your own. There are very seldom are the situations where you're going to come in with an existing peer group when you make that jump into your college career. And I know those relationships sometimes have a lot to do with how you consider the ways you'll give back in the future. Because when I am talking with alumni and other potential donors, an aspect I like to bring up pretty regularly is, who do you keep in contact with from your days at the institution? Do you still have a peer group of fellow alumni who you made close relationships with while you were here? What does that mean to you? And I think it's been an interesting shift, at least in the past, 10, 15 years, where social media keeps us so closely connected that we've moved away from the past when it comes to events like reunion, where, a lot of people would turn up for the physical reunion events because they wanted to have that. And it's not just college and universities, but high schools. And a lot of people would show up in order to find out, oh, what was that classmate doing? Let me share a little bit about what I'm about now. But now, Facebook, LinkedIn, you probably have a good sense of what those folks are doing. So it also presents challenges where in the past you would kind of lean on alumni associations and the university itself to set up events that would update you. You're able to keep your own social circles now. So there's a little less of that alumni engagement component that's required in order to keep those social circles strong and keep you updated on what other people are doing. But the social aspect and the personal development aspect, it sets the stage for careers, but it also helps you grow into the person that you're going to be and realize, the things you find important. And I think that journey's incredible when it comes to some of the stories that I've heard from people and, the real reasons why they feel it's of value to give back to a university.
So I love that it's interesting that you brought up social media and how it relates to reunions. So it's almost like reunions are equivalent of in-person doom scrolling, right? To see what people are up to.
In the past, I think so, yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the relationships. I guess I wanted to ask you about what is the role of individual experience? Like I think about my own college years, and you had kids that were all in on music department. I never set foot in there personally, but somebody who is in a Greek organization, a fraternity or sorority, or a sports team, or different majors. How does your individual experience impact your desire to contribute back? Because some people don't. Some people don't have that connection.
Yeah, it's going to be different for everyone. And I think that is the main role in which the frontline fundraisers like Major Gifts, like Stewardship Annual Giving, really find their impact. Because you have to develop your own relationships with those individuals to find out what really makes them tick. I've worked in roles where it's been embedded in a specific school or a specific college within the university structure. And that only gives you a warm tip in the direction of what someone might care about. Because like we just talked about, sometimes it's the personal side of things. Sometimes it's the extracurriculars. Sometimes someone takes a degree, like myself, for example, a sociology degree. That can go in so many different directions. Right. It would be very difficult to pinpoint, that this career or that career is directly related to something like sociology or psychology. So you really need to establish those relationships and be inquisitive, be questioning of what that person's really interested in, because that can also shift over time, So a lot of times when I'm talking to someone, I'm, going to ask them about their experience at the school. Was it positive? Was it negative? What would you change? What would you have done? If you could go back again, would you have changed the direction that you headed? Would you have done something differently? But also, where do you find yourself now? What's important to you in what you're currently doing? And, is philanthropy and our nonprofits in that picture for you? If they are, what stokes that passion? If you currently give to an organization, why do you do that? What really has driven you to want to open up your finances to make sure that they succeed? And if it hasn't been with the university I represent, are you open to that conversation? Are you open to find out about the programs that we have that might match up with your area of interest? So while there's been, kind of these assigned and prescribed lanes for, I'm fundraising for this specific program or this specific major, or, what have you, really the donor drives the ship, the donor steers the ship, and you have to allow that to happen, because to do anything otherwise is foolhardy to think that you're going to, it's not sales. It's a completely different thing. And you need to really hear and actively listen to what the person across the table or across the screen is telling you about their current interests. And, if it's an economist who, really, really cares about the arts, well, I'm going to connect you with someone in the arts. You're going to, learn about what we have going in that. And I think that's a significant advantage that universities have, just in fundraising, especially when you talk about medium to large size universities, is that pretty much if you, a potential donor, have an interest that you share with me, I can probably align it with something that the university has going on. Like you said, it could be music. It could be the connection to, things like medical research. It could be in an area of, student accessibility, and that comes into play a lot, the pay it forward mentality of folks who were helped in the past who might not have been able to afford their degree, but received a scholarship, received a financial aid package. Now are doing well enough to want to open that door for someone that they see, could be them from the past.
Yeah, no, that I like that pay it forward concept a lot. So let me ask you this. You work at an institution that you were actually a student at. And I imagine you come at it from a very different angle because you share something with the donors that you're likely speaking with, right? Like you have that shared common ground. I mean, that's a pretty significant overlap, like, the Hill or the specific traditions that happened at schools. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to work at your own alma mater compared to your past experiences?
So I think it just develops a base level of trust that I understand, that it's not the same place, it's not the same experience as, I might have had or they might have had. But, it's also, in previous roles, it's always also been one of the first questions that I got. Oh, well, did you go here? What was your experience like? What did you study? That sort of thing. And in those cases, it was fine to, I'm going to be transparent and honest, no, I didn't, but here's what I'm learning about. And, had I known that as I was making my decision, would I have made a different decision? Maybe, because there's some really impressive things going on. Actually, about 10 years ago or so, when I was in annual giving at another school, I went to a conference, the Northeast Annual Giving Conference, and we had someone who spoke on this level of overlap, and his recommendation was, don't do it. You don't want to see how the sausage gets made, which I found interesting. But I'd say, from my personal experience, I don't think that's the case. I'm always impressed by the things that I learn are going on. It excites me to be able to share that with, fellow alumni who, like I know, and like we all know, lives are just so busy and we get so many emails, we get so many pieces of information that it's very difficult to focus in and kind of internalize all that's going on that you should be proud of. And, just like media and the news, the bad news tends to rise to the surface. Yeah. So if you are not actively pursuing and trying to find out the great things that are going on from your alma mater, it's easy to overlook those great things. However, if some, terrible situation arises and it's in the news, you're going to be like, oh, well, that personally reflects badly on me. So I think it's been a good experience because I think, the opportunity to genuinely share in the excitement that someone I'm engaging with and connecting with, there's just incredible value towards building those relationships and, establishing a level of trust and transparency that you may not get if you're new onto the scene and haven't spent 4 or 6, et cetera, years as a student there.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about endowments. It is such an interesting concept to me because few nonprofits have endowments, or at least endowments that are meaningful enough. And, kind of looking at some of the institutions of higher ed, especially some of the older Ivy League institutions. I mean, these are GDP of
massive.
Yeah, right. So I think I have so many questions about it. I mean, it kind of provides a cushion, right? So if you don't hit your numbers one year as an institution, it certainly gives you a little, the lights are still going to be going on. There's not going to be a massive change. But also, how do you address that with donors? Like, how do you say to a donor, there's billions of dollars in the bank, but we still need your money? How do you kind of sell that value proposition?
So I think there's a bit of misunderstanding when it comes to endowments, and you see the schools that report these ginormous numbers, billions of dollars worth of invested funds. I've been with institutions that have been up above that $1 billion range. But the misunderstanding really is that at least the places that I've been, the insider knowledge that I have does not, I've not worked at Harvard, I've not worked at Princeton, I've not worked at any of these mega institutions that are, have extreme levels of philanthropic wealth when it comes to their endowments. But the ones that I have worked at, the common misunderstanding is that it's one large pool of money. Now, it is all pooled together, but generally speaking, what is the endowment is a series of smaller funds that are invested on behalf of what the donors want to have happen. So, I've worked with endowed funds that have been as little as $25,000. I've worked on ones that have been in the 7-figure range. And really what it's all about is working with those individuals on what kind of impact do you really want to have? Is it to see students next year receive some level of financial aid or assistance? Or are you really thinking about the long-term impact that you could have on students, not just next year, but next year and into perpetuity, into the future, forever and ever? And that's really where I go when talking about endowed funds, because if it is something like a scholarship, it's going to take a little bit longer to build up. The money needs to sit for a certain amount of time. It needs to generate that interest, which is usually what the awards are given out of. So it's not instant gratification. It takes a little bit more of a mind shift on like, oh, I want to see, I want to meet a student that I've impacted, now in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months. But when it comes to the long-term impact, that's really where endowment is powerful, is because it is a permanent fund. If your interest as a donor is to have your name on something that will likely exist forever, an endowed fund is how you get that done. If it's to make sure that, a specific program isn't threatened by being cut because of short budgets in a given year, the endowment for that specific purpose is how you get that done. And because there are all these collections of smaller funds that get added up into what's reported as the endowment, it still adheres to the donor's rights. These are gift funds that have, either agreements or, specific wording on the donor's intent on what they want to see happen, the purpose behind it. Even what was driving them personally to want to see this type of fund succeed. So, more. Speaking, we won't. I lost you there for a second.
Yep.
We're back.
Perfect.
So yeah, to just recap that, the endowment, and while the endowments for universities can be substantially large, generally speaking, they're a collection of smaller funds that have very specific purposes that are established by the donors for exactly what they want to see succeed. And so my conversations with people are, both have value. Seeing students succeed, seeing programs succeed next year, the year after, and the year after that is incredibly important because it'll impact people now. Long-term viability for those funds, equally important. And it really comes down to the individual that is making the contribution and what they want to see happen.
Sure. So we talked a lot about substantive, serious, insightful issues. So now, if you're ready, let's have a little bit of fun, if that's
Sure.
okay. All right. So first question, and I think it's fun. You may or may not agree. Outside of the higher education giving and fundraising that you do you have any charities or projects or initiatives that you personally are really passionate about?
So yeah, myself and my wife, we give one. I like to support all the places that I've worked. So, any of the past institutions, current institutions that I've worked for, I always make my own contribution. Walk the talk
Sure.
for all those situations because in a large part working with donors and explaining the impact of what they can have, it gets internalized. And I understand that each of these places, I can have my own impact. So I'm always an annual level contributor to places that I've worked. But my wife and I also contribute to places that are meaningful in our lives. The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia has been really impactful to some health issues that we've experienced as a family. So we contribute regularly to their efforts, great place, great hospital, great people. And then I'm a big peer-to-peer person. So when it comes to, and we touched on social media, and it's such an important place to find these opportunities. But I'm really big on helping friends who ask for the help, whether that's, a polar plunge or fundraising for their kids' softball team or, whatever that might be. I always talk to donors, and I've heard it a lot, where someone says, well, I only wish it could be more. And, what I always usually say is, the gift you make should be meaningful. Now, that might be different for everyone. Someone who's got millions of dollars in the bank and can make $100,000 contribution, that's a meaningful gift to them. Someone working in a nonprofit space who can give, $25, $50, $100, that's a meaningful gift to them as well. So they're not huge amounts of money, but like I said before, I know from annual giving experience that, that base of the donor giving pyramid, those gifts add up, they have incredible impact. So those are really the areas that my family decides to contribute to, things that are meaningful personally to us, and then to our network of friends, family, and folks that, put themselves out there to ask for the help.
Yeah, no, the peer-to-peer is such an interesting one because it's almost like the cause becomes somewhat secondary to the person you're supporting. I mean, obviously you wouldn't contribute to something you disagree with, but generally it's about supporting friends, family members, rather than choosing specific issue. And
it's interesting because, I'm curious about all these things. So I've asked folks that I've reached out to or that have contributed to, well, I work in fundraising, what aspects of doing this do you not like to do? Like what makes you tick when it comes to becoming an amateur fundraiser because you're doing something like the polar plunge? And a lot of them say, well, it's uncomfortable to ask for money. I feel like I'm putting people out. And I'm usually pretty quick to provide the feedback of, well, do you believe in the cause of what you're doing? Do you feel strongly about the need for the support that your actions are going to provide? And they always say yes. And I'm like, well, then it's really just a mindset thing. You just have to ground yourself in the fact that you're doing good work. It may be uncomfortable a little bit, but the end results are going to outweigh the slight discomfort you have by putting yourself out there and saying, would love to have support from, this is something that's meaningful to me. I would love to have people who support me feel strongly about this as well. And that usually has incredible impact.
Yeah, just a tip on polar plunges, don't wear a toga. They get very waterlogged. So I just happen to know that. So to move on, you live in Vermont. I've been to Vermont, but just very briefly. And I think of, ice cream and outdoors and green things. And what are some things, can you name 5 things about living in Vermont, either confirming stereotypes or maybe surprise us?
Let's see. So first, you just said ice cream. So I had to learn through experience that soft serve ice cream up here are called creamies. And the creamies, phenomenal, like all soft serve ice cream is. I'm originally from New Jersey, so these regional changes kind of can catch you off guard. But so that's one that I'll kind of dovetail into a second one, which is, the maple syrup situation is no joke. Like if you've been wine tasting, you've half lived the experience of going on a maple syrup tasting. The sugar high and the experience of seeing that, there are different subtle flavors to all these different maple syrups that you can, put your hands on up here. It's an incredible experience to be able to say, oh yeah, this grade B minus, or I think they even rebranded maple syrup that they don't call it grade B anymore because that sounds less than. But grade B is my favorite type of maple syrup. And they make creamies that are maple syrup flavored, which are just incredible. I also happen to enjoy that Vermont takes very seriously maintaining the natural beauty of the state, in that it's one of only a few states where billboards are not legal. You can't have, side of the highway billboards showcasing like, your next McDonald's is in, 3,000 yards. I'm loving it. So I always love that kind of changeover when I'm coming in from out of state, that, I leave New York State, for example, and away go the billboards, and all I see are, depending on the season, beautiful changing leaves, or, what they call stick season around now, where there's nothing on the trees and it's just, white little jutting sticks out of the ground. But the natural beauty is, I just love it up here for that reason. And speaking of seasons, there are, what I would call an extended calendar of seasons when it comes to living here, because you got your typical, spring, summer, there's fall, but then within fall is this little section of leaf peeper season where, foliage is at its peak, and just about everyone who can drive here or fly here tries to get here so they can take pictures of the beautiful leaves. I'm lucky enough to have that view right outside my window on the regular. And then you have winter, but following winter, there's an unfortunate season called mud season, where everything melts, everything gets muddy and gross. Your cars are covered in mud. You have to constantly have 2 pairs of shoes with you, especially if you're in a professional setting. You wear the boots in, you switch over to the dress shoes. You just make sure to take care of that. And I think those are some of my most favorite aspects of Vermont. And, when it comes to mud season, maybe least favorite, but it's still exciting. It's still a little bit different up here than other places I've lived.
Yeah, no, I've never heard of that. And the stick season, that's a good one because it's so accurate. So, well, Max, you've been a wonderful guest today. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights, and appreciate you being a guest.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Keep up the good work. It's always exciting, like I said earlier, to be able to share these insights, hear from other folks who are working in this space. I always love to say it's excellent to help people do well at doing good. And I think that's what you're doing with this podcast and with this video series.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Yep. Take care.